our system from going through. Just want to take this opportunity to say good evening to everyone and welcome to our space. Welcome to the second evening of the CBSE Researcher and Author Speaker Series. I know we have an amazing evening in store for you all. I see community. I always like to make sure I recognize community in the space. I see community in the space, and I want to thank you for being here. Just want to do a quick recap and get into a few things, and we get right into our first speaker, which is going to be Dr. Linda Ifenu. So get yourself ready for that. And all our speakers do have access to do their slides. I just want to say last night was amazing. Last night was amazing. The intention for this series is to share our work, but also share the parts that I know our graduate students want to know about. And it's how do we go about doing this work, especially methodology. Last night, we got a feast from Dr. Stephanie Ferron of York University, also, of course, our OISE grad, Dr. Kashka Watson, who is also an OISE grad, who is at Brock University, and of course, our own Professor Key Alexander. There was so much last night that I took away from this learning process that is here. So this is not just to show our wares and show what we do. It's how we pour into community. And I want to say thanks to those persons. Tonight, we have Professor Linda, we have Dr. Marie Green, and we have Professor Jo Kiwan, who is going to share with us and pour into us and pour into the center. Like I said to you before, I'm on a high from last evening, and you can get a copy, of course, already posted on social media and will be on our website in a few minutes. Before I get into anything else, I want to make sure at this time I move with two acknowledgements. So let's get into that at this time. So the University of Toronto land acknowledgement. We wish to acknowledge this land on which the University of Toronto operates. For thousands of years, it has been the traditional land of the Huron-Wendat, the Seneca, and the Mississaugas of the Credit. Today, this meeting place is still the home to many Indigenous people across Turtle Island, and we are grateful to have the opportunity to work on this land. Before I move into the ancestral acknowledgement, I want to remind all of us who are here this evening, if you have the opportunity to listen yesterday, that is October the 15th video, you will notice how intentional Professor Key Alexander spoke about Turtle Island and using the language Turtle Island, and spoke about the research and how it's and the centering of Turtle Island in their research. And so there's something I just want to draw your attention to as you review those videos. An ancestral acknowledgement. We wish to acknowledge the Indigenous Africans who were forcefully removed from their native lands and dispersed across the New World. This involuntary migration heavily contributed to the movement of African descendant people across the African diaspora to places like Canada. As students and learners, we deem it highly necessary to think deeper and examine the processes that led to the disposition of Indigenous peoples on this land and settler colonialism, stolen people on stolen land. In entering a conversation about anti-Black racism, it is important to center the humanity of Black children and Black families and to examine systems such as the education system that act upon them. And this is sourced from Natasha Henry, president of the Ontario Black History Society, educational consultant and historian, and is now also professor at York University. The next thing I wish to do before I get into anything else is to give you, and for the recording, to take you on a quick tour of our website. I encourage everyone to check out our website. When you get the opportunity to do so, you check out our be a part of our mailing list, look at all our upcoming events. But specifically, I want to point out our Black faculty research student gathering. I know I saw Professor Ann Lopez in the room, and if Professor Ann Lopez, check on the recording from yesterday, I shared quite a bit about our first session where Professor Ann Lopez opened the entire series and talked a lot about engaging in critical research. And Professor Lopez, you were not present last night, but it's there for the recording. I talked about the ways in which the space, the physical space, was transformed. I feel my energy just shifting, transformed into community without we saying it. And if we have to say community every time we do something, then we are not doing community. And I talked about the fact that on that evening on October the 1st, before I reached home, there were 2 emails from 2 persons in the community who were in attendance. One of our own PhD student, but another doctoral candidate from another university. And that was so emotional and just excited about being in that space. 23 of us as Black scholars, leaders, teachers, educators, graduate student engaged in that critical conversation led by Professor Ann Lopez, and it meant so much. And we can't wait. We're excited for what is to come. You can see on the list that next month it's going to be Professor Rosin Hampton, followed again by Professor Keen Alexander, and you'll see what's coming up. Make it a date, register to be in the space. And like I said, dinner is also going to be served for the next 2 upcoming events. The next thing I want to share with you on our website is, if you go into our resources, you will be able to see all the recordings of our 5 Black faculty in conversation. All the recordings are from 2020 to 2024 Black faculty in conversation. These, I must tell you, are being used by different people in community to have conversations and to treat. I get email from school saying, we use one of your videos today for our staff meeting. So I just wanted to say again, thank you to Professor Joe Kiwan, who is in the space, Professor Marie Green, who is in the space, Professor Ann Lopez, who is in the space, and Professor Linda Ifenu, who is in the space. All of these professors who are here in the space tonight have been a part of these 1 or 2 or 3 or even 4 of these Black faculty in conversation. And I want you to hold the date for the 2025 Black faculty in conversation. And that date, if I am correct, is actually, yes, it is. It is February the 12th. It's Wednesday, February the 12th at 5 p.m. for the 2025 Black faculty in conversation. And I can tell you of a fact that these are spaces that the community is highly excited about, and the way in which we pour into community. And I want to say thank you for doing that. We're going to get right into, thank you so much, Sarah. We're going to get right into our presentations this evening, and each presenter have 20 minutes to a full presentation. And then we take 1 or 2 questions from the audience. To do that, I know Professor Mary Green, you are second in line, and I know you have some guests with you as well. If you just remind me of their names in my message, then I'll also make them co-hosts so they can actually move their slide as well and participate. Last night, we had Professor Stephanie Ferron, who had a participant from the community who shared the space with her. It was just magical in their reading of their finding. It was something else. So we're going to move right along. At this time, I'm going to call our GA for the center, one of our GAs for the center, Sarah Mohammed, who is going to introduce our first presenter, Dr. Linda Ifenu. Go ahead, Sarah.
Well, thank you so much, Dr. Campbell. My name is Sahara. I am the GA for this center. I am proud and I'm honored to announce this lovely individual, Dr. Linda Iwanufu, who is a tenured track assistant professor in the Department of Applied Psychology and Human Development here at OIZ. And she's also a licensed clinical psychologist here in Ontario. Dr. Iwanufu specializes in the psychological assessment and treatment of children, youth, and families. She has experience providing psychological services in diverse settings, including schools, public schools, community mental health agencies, and various private practice clinics. Dr. Uwenifu is the director of the Power in Youth Research Lab, where she specializes in research examining how racism impacts the health of Black children and youth. She provides clinical training and teaches graduate level courses on anti-racist and anti-oppressive approaches to professional psychological practice. And she regularly provides consultation and provides supports to health and educational practitioners who work in schools, community, uh, and private practice settings. Her firm commitment to community-centered practice and to minimizing inequities in professional mental health services shines through in her involvement in numerous advocacy roles at local, national, and international levels. She is currently chair-elect of the Black Psychology section of the Canadian Psychological Association, which is Canada's largest national association of psychologists. Dr. Imanifu is passionate about decolonizing school and clinical child psychology education and practice and hopes to inspire a whole new generation of diversified scholar practitioners. So without further ado, Dr. Linda Iwanfu.
Thank you so much, Sarah, for that lengthy introduction, but so sweet. Thank you, and thank you, Dr. Campbell. Thank you, everybody, for being here tonight, for your interest in our research. We, as professors, always love talking about our research, so thank you for this opportunity. I really appreciate it. And I hope there's some psychology folks in the house today to sort of support me. I'm very, so if you know psych people, we tend to be a bit scientific. So I might seem a little bit that way, but that's just the nature of what we do. But today, just getting into it, I will be broadly speaking about some important research on anti-Black racism and its impact on the health of Black children and youth, particularly, children as a specialty for me, both in terms of clinical practice, but also in terms of my research. As far as I know, I'm the only Black tenure track faculty in Canada with a research program that's specifically focused on Black children's mental health. We don't have a lot of Black psychologists as it is. And if you've ever heard me talk, I talk about that to no end, especially those who have both the clinical and the research expertise to do this kind of work. And worse yet, Black faculty in psychology departments is almost unheard of in Canada, which is a real shame. So we obviously need more folks, who share some of those lived experiences of the populations we want to study in psychology and to lead this kind of research, because this is really lacking. And my, intersectional identities obviously influenced my work, of course. A Black woman. I was born in Nigeria and, came as a refugee to Canada at a very young age with my parents and siblings, and now a Canadian for many years, having to adapt to the Canadian context. I'm a mother to multiple Black children, and then building a professional identity in a field that more often than not really shuts out people who look like us, right? So it looks like me. So I have to acknowledge, though, that those identities do play a role in terms of my focus in my research and my approach, right? So it's an important piece to kind of acknowledge that positionality. But getting back to tonight's research topic, for those who are interested to learn more, as we all should know, and I'll say I don't have slides. I have, so I hope you can grasp onto my every word and ask me any questions you have at the end. But as we all know, systemic racism is really a pervasive issue that affects many aspects of life, including healthcare and healthcare outcomes. But what's particularly concerning is how it specifically affects young Black people. So tonight I'll be sharing about one important study in my research program, which is a mixed method systematic review and meta-analysis, which hopes to highlight the alarming consequences of exposure to anti-Black racism on the physical, the mental, and the behavioral health of Black kids, teens, young adults. and looking at the mechanisms through which it, actually exerts that impact based on the most current research in the area. So I'll give a little bit of background into this topic of focus for me. We know that anti-Black racism is a social determinant of health. It's one way that, we really see health inequities kind of coming through for Black children and youth. We know for many young Black people, especially in the wake of COVID, after COVID, we saw rising rates in mental health problems and concerns, including suicide attempts, unfortunately. And related to that, there's been a lot of research interest. So there's a lot of explosion in scholarship in the last decade, and especially in the last few years, really focused on understanding racism and its health impacts on racialized youth. So people looking at outcomes like depression, anxiety, chronic disease. So that body of research is going to be really important moving forward. It's going to shape practice and policy and so on. But it's even more important when that research is synthesized in a way that key stakeholders like mental health practitioners can actually look at what the research says, to make use of it, right, and actually apply it to their work. Because the research is out there, but we haven't really synthesized it. So systematic reviews and meta-analyses are, they represent the gold standard when it comes to research for synthesizing the best evidence we have available, right, to inform specifically healthcare decision making and public health policy. The issue is that, prior efforts to synthesize all the literature looking at racism and health outcomes mostly have focused on adults or people who live in particular geographic regions or even research on broader racialized populations, right? But what about young Black people, children, teenagers, young adults? Unfortunately, there's not been a lot of attention paid to it, combining studies focused on their specific unique experiences. So our study really hopes to address that gap using a mixed method approach to systematic review, where we're focusing on synthesizing updated research on the physical, mental, behavioral health effects of racism on Black young people. And we're actually incorporating both quantitative and qualitative data from a diverse range of sources, including traditional, empirical sources, but also non-traditional sources. We know that a lot of the research that concerns Black people, Black health, sometimes are published in other ways, in alternative means. And so we don't want to exclude those other forms of knowledge, right? Specifically, we know that there's not a lot of, prior meta-analyses or systematic reviews that have really looked at differential effects of racism for different subgroups of participants. So what happens when we're looking at different ethnicities within the Black population, right? Black is a very broad term. What does that mean? We have to look at different ethnicities. What about age and gender? All these things. Not a lot of studies have combined and looked at it from that perspective. And a lot of them come from primarily quantitative research studies, right? From a critical race and social justice perspective, this is really a very biased evidence base that we use in the field, because it does exclude a lot of important sources of knowledge, especially those that really elevate the voices of our populations that we want to better help and serve, right? So it's a huge issue. Right. So the one thing is we have to synthesize all this new research that's coming up, all this interest in addressing racism and health. But we want to do it in a way that is really as comprehensive as possible, right? And is fair. So in terms of our methodology, this is why our study will be using a mixed methods approach. So we're integrating both qualitative and quantitative data from over hundreds of studies. We will use specific guidelines for those who know systematic review, the PRISMA, JBI guidelines. They're just standard sort of guidelines that we are supposed to use when we're synthesizing bodies of evidence. As my research team, when we're looking to synthesize and interpret these data, we're applying critical race theories, intersectional theories, biopsychosocial frameworks to really help us understand and account for the different factors that help us understand that relationship of racism and exposure to that and child health. So we're thinking about things like structural racism, interpersonal racism, internalized racism, historical trauma, concepts of power, privilege, oppression, psychosocial stress, all of these things, just to ensure that we are capturing the complexities of what anti-Black racism, how it manifests in all its forms, right? And by incorporating these non-traditional knowledge sources as well, we hope that we can get a much more comprehensive sense of the issue. So people love to share research findings because it's exciting. This research is actually currently in progress. Okay, we have a large team of people working on it. It includes a team of U of T librarians. We have numerous students in my Power and Youth Research Lab, and we've devised a comprehensive sort of peer-reviewed electronic search strategy. And we're doing, we've conducted a search using keywords from that search strategy, right, as you do with any systematic review. And so we've looked at multiple databases, Ovid, Medline, ProQuest. We've looked at dissertations, theses, Gray literature databases. We want to capture information from places like Google Scholar, websites, book chapters that often might not be looked at. So we're trying to really, we've tried to really broaden that search. Now, our initial search, believe it or not, yielded about over 7,000 studies. So imagine having to go through 7,000 articles. It's insane. So we really needed a big team of people working on this. So we have a team of RAs and volunteers who have been really diligently working to whittle down sort of that pile of studies, that first stage of screening. So right now it's just about 1,000 studies. So what we're going to do is then those studies will undergo a second, more in-depth round of full text reviews. So we actually go through the full study and decide on the final number of studies from which we will then pull data, right? And start to really look at what these researchers have found, looking at the relationship of racism to health outcomes for Black identified young people. And we're looking at from birth, from infancy up to age 25. So the kinds of health outcomes that we're interested in, are things like physical health, okay, so infectious disease, chronic conditions, birth outcomes, physiological markers of stress. We're also interested in mental health outcomes, of course, my specialty, so things like anxiety, depression, suicidality, self-esteem. We are looking at behavioral outcomes, so risk-taking, aggression, health behavior, so how does racism affect sleep, substance use, and so on, as well as how people experience health care. So what are their access, their satisfaction with our healthcare services. So I basically want to summarize research looking at the connection of anti-Black racism to these outcomes for Black children, and identify other variables that might modify that relationship. So, these are what we call moderators and mediators, right? And to see how strong those associations are. So, for example, if studies suggest that anti-Black racism exposure is linked to, let's say, low birth weight in infants, then we also want to know, well, what are the potential causes for that link, right? Or what might be factors that modify that relationship, like maybe getting really excellent prenatal care, right? So we want to see how these relationships kind of look, what causes them, what changes them, and also want to see how they differ when we consider factors like, ethnic group. If you're from, you're coming directly from, an African country, or you're a particular gender identification, how does that influence those relationships or that experience of exposure to racism and the impacts, right? So we really want to look at that in more depth. Okay, so excited to share the results. We don't yet have them because we have so many studies to go through, which is exciting because it means there's a lot of interest and a lot of, people have been doing this work, which is fantastic, but it just shows you how important it is to pull that together. So people who are actually serving young people can say, oh, okay, this is what's going on. This is a summarization of this. What can I pull from that to pull into my work, right? So we have no doubt in terms of our anticipated findings that, at minimum, we will show that exposure to anti-Black racism unfortunately, we know that it has a devastating impact on, various health outcomes, physical, mental, behavioral. Based on some of what we're seeing so far, we anticipate some pretty significant correlations between exposure to racism and poor academic performance, higher risks of, certain negative mental health issues. But there's a lot we don't know, right? Especially with respect to strengths of this community and the significant diversity among the young Black population that might make for some surprising and maybe less expected findings, especially in the field of psychology, where we tend to kind of take this sort of very negative perspective rather than a strengths-based approach. But we anticipate we will get some different findings too, right? Because we know, for example, that recent immigrants, are less likely to report or identify harmful exposure to anti-Black racism, especially when they come from regions where Blackness was the norm, right? And so it's a very different thing to be asking them questions about, exposure. So we have lots to see and kind of learn and a lot of data, as I said, to wade through. But we're really, really excited about this research and excited to, to share those findings when they do come out. The study is so important because it highlights the critical importance of addressing anti-Black racism as a social determinant of health. We know that we have rising mental health needs in our community, especially among our young Black children and youth. Lots of research coming in. So it's important that we synthesize that to clarify what we need to do next, right? So we need to know what we have to determine where to go, right? And then, really help inform these interventions, these evidence-based approaches for addressing the health impacts. So that's the goal. Ultimately, we want to mitigate those impacts, right? So that's what we hope to do. And in Canada, there are really less than a handful of licensed practitioner scholars, including myself, who hold both clinical and scholarly expertise in Black youth mental health, so children specifically. And so this review is really important for my team because we will be one of the pioneers, in this area of child health, but also the findings will certainly set the stage for a lot more research, especially in the Canadian context, to help us address this growing, unfortunate health crisis among Black young people in facing racism, which we know is our reality, unfortunately. So that's what it's about. That's what we're working on. It's one of our projects. So I wanted to share that with you.
Wow.
And I'm to questions.
Thank you so much, Professor Linda Ifenu. And this one, you said something, and this is important, at the beginning, you took the mic, you said, thank you for reading that long bio. I want you to understand how important that bio is for us in this community. This is for us. This is us. This is for us, by us. This is the real FUBU over here, right? It is for us, by us. This is us. And you said one handful. And that is talking about what is the lack thereof. But we at OISE can be proud, and I hope we at OISE is proud that one of those handful is you, and you belong to us. You are part of us. And I trust and hope that I have extended the love and care and respect to you that I know I should, and I hope you feel that in the building. And we will work on making sure that people understand what you bring. You said at the beginning, I hope there's some psychologists in the space. Yes, they are. And I had somebody inbox me saying, Dr. ABC, I really have an emergency. I can't make it, and I want to listen to Professor Linda so bad. So I know that you're speaking. And funny, because last night, one of our presenters, which is also Professor Key Alexander, talked about the progress in the world. And I said, we are not here to just talk about research. We want to talk about the process. And then hearing you talk about anticipated outcome, I smile because my students in 5708 are here listening to you. And we talked about the ways we anticipate results and the way that can be dangerous or not so dangerous. And the way you explain that was so powerful when you said these are things we're anticipating, but these are the things we have no idea of. That is research. That is why we're pulling up our chairs so close. And I want to thank you for what you said about the idea of this research will impact and influence practitioners. This is what research is about, students. I say student because a lot of our students are in the space. This is what research is about. I know institutional research makes it look different, and we compete and we put up our signs of how much journals we have, and it becomes what it is. But last night we were reminded by Stephanie Farron, especially, of what research as Black researchers and community should look like and the usefulness. And so I want to thank you for that. Before we move on to the next person, I also want to talk about, you talk about moderators and mediators. I take notes, Linda, because I'm a student when I come to this session. I am very student when I come to this session. Like, people say to me, how much you know? I said, I know a lot because I learn a lot from people like you. And so I want to thank you. But before we move on to the next presenter, I want to ask anyone, is there someone with a question for Professor Linda? You have a question about method, about result, about anti-Blackness, about anything that she said that you want to jump in? We give you the opportunity. That's why we do not use a webinar format. Take note, we do not use webinar format. It's intentional. That's why I don't want you to mess it up. All right? Don't mess it up by putting the mic on and doing Humpty Dumpty. We don't want that. Who wants to ask a question? Carla Adele Gray, it's over to you. Welcome to the space. Take the mic quickly. Go ahead.
Dr. Linda, thank you. It's always a pleasure. I wanted to ask you about a comment towards the end of your talk around the anticipation of results from recent immigrants that have less exposure coming from predominantly Black countries with racism and the possible psychological impacts of not having been born and raised in predominantly Eurocentric experience.
Hi, Carla. Thanks for that question. Were you done with the question? Yes? Yeah, okay. Yeah, so that's, one of our anticipated findings in terms of the fact that we never really know, right? So people always, when we think about anti-Black racism and its impact, there tends to be a real focus that, there's going to be this very, this correlation that is, really highlights negative mental health or negative consequences of racism. And the reality is that our populations are so diverse. And when we don't think about factors like ethnic background, immigration status, acculturation, we really don't do very good justice to understanding people's real unique experiences with this, right? And so because the body of research that is out there now, actually, we've got a lot of people who have looked at that. And so we're anticipating that we're going to see some different kinds of results when it comes to issues of immigration and immigrants who come from particular destinations where, as I said, perhaps the experience of anti-Black racism was very different because, Blackness might have been the norm. If you look up something called it's not actually a new phenomenon. It's called the healthy immigrant effect, where people who tend to come to other places, especially where whiteness is not the majority, then they tend to actually report, at least based on their self-report, being healthier, being better adjusted in terms of, social relationships and so on, and tend to underreport exposure, or at least perceived exposure to anti-Black racism. Unfortunately, that, we see that over time, I guess, as people have to acculturate or adapt or, face and adapt to spaces that are very white. They learn different ways of being, different ways of seeing themselves, right? And so then we might start to see those differences in terms of reported health outcomes. But generally, when we're looking at sort of very recent immigrants, there tends to be this healthy immigrant effect that we see that perhaps holds promise in terms of maybe intervention and early sort of prevention of problems, and sort of holding on to those strengths and to the ways that, people view themselves coming from places where perhaps their Blackness was a strength and it was viewed very positively. And, so how do we leverage that and encourage people to hold on to that so that that effect doesn't sort of wither away over time? Hope that helps to answer your question, but we're really excited to see what the results show us about that.
Yes, thank you so much for that. And I must tell you, you just taught me something. See, I tell you, that's why I take my notes. I didn't know there was a name for it, but I know the phenomenon, but I didn't know there was a name for it. That those of us who come from predominantly Black spaces, when we reach into these spaces, we are, for the first couple of years, we are quite unbothered because we understand who we are and know what it is. And but then, of course, like you said, that changes a lot. And your research would have to also advise us, how do we remain unbothered? Because when we are in all of this. So thank you so much. Thank you, thank you, thank you. I'm honored to be the chair and the director of these sessions. And I mean that when I said that, because I left last night so full. And tonight I'm already full. And we haven't even heard from the next two persons as yet. So thank you so much. Thank you, Professor Linda. Enough love, and enough respect. At this time, we're gonna move right along, and we're gonna call on Summer Hyatt, who is a MT student, a Master of Teaching student, and also the one of our work study student, amazing work study student. I use the adjective amazing because it is so. One of our amazing work study student in the center, in the CBSE center, and she's going to introduce Professor Dr. Marie Green. Summer, over to you, please.
Good evening, everyone. Can you all hear me correctly?
Yes, we can.
Awesome. Thank you, Professor, for giving me the honor and privilege of introducing Dr. Marie Green. She's an Ontario certified teacher. She completed her PhD studies at the University of St. Michael's College for achieving the highest academic standing. She conducts research at the intersection of Christianity, education, race, and indigeneity. At U of T, she has taught Black Lives Matter in the classroom and courses on anti-discriminatory education.
Thank you so much for that. Another thing to add it to Professor Dr. Mary Green. Dr. Mary Green has been an intentional part of the CBSE and the Black Faculty in Conversation, the work we do here, and the work with BFEP, and is a teacher that I work alongside with and have the joy of working with. If you know anything about workplaces, if you enjoy working with your classmate or your worker next door, you know you're in a good space. And thank you so much for that, Dr. Green, for allowing me to be in a good space when I'm in community with you. Enough love, enough respect. I also know that Dr. Marie Green is going to be having some guests with her, and I'm going to get your guests ready to join you as well. So your guests will have the co-host privilege as well, if they have something to share, and they also will be joining you to be pinned. Dr. Marie Green, over to you.
Thank you so much, Dr. ABC, and thank you so much, Summer, for that lovely introduction. I second that emotion, Dr. ABC. So hello and good evening to everyone, and a special shout out to my co-panelists, Doctors Juan and Iwenefew. I am so looking forward to hearing the outcome for that, or the results of the study. I think there is a lot of findings that are going to come out of that are going to be so rich for the community. Always lovely to share spaces with you. And Dr. ABC, it goes without saying that I appreciate the fact that you have done such a great job with always just, creating these spaces for us. And my prayer for you is that there will always be space made for you to do what you do, which is inspire, encourage, and uplift.
I
So
receive it. I receive it.
Thank you so much. My task today is to share with you a collaboration between myself and Dr. George Day entitled Trees with Roots, Marcus Garvey's Emancipatory Pedagogy in the Caribbean and Africa. It is part of a larger collection of essays in the Bloomsbury Handbook of Caribbean and African Studies in Education. And I'm going to go ahead and just share my screen here so you can have a look at this amazing publication, which I've been able to confirm is available on the UFT library system digitally. So I definitely want to encourage everyone to go ahead and take a look. I hope you can see my screen.
Yes, we can.
Great. All right. So I do have a few of the editors here with me today. And I'm very honored that they have taken time out of their very busy schedules to be here. I want to take some time to introduce them. And I'm glad that the note was made earlier about, those credentials, because yes, it is amazing just to kind of know the expertise and the great gifts that come into the rooms that we're in at any given time. Not here on this webinar this evening is Professor George J. Saifa-Day, who I was very fortunate to collaborate with on this chapter. Dr. Day is an acclaimed scholar in OIS's Department of Social Justice and Education. He is the director of the Center for Integrated Anti-Racism Studies and one of Canada's foremost scholars on race and anti-racism studies. Professor Day is a member of the Royal Society of Canada and honoree of many awards, including the prestigious Whitworth Award for Career Research and Education. He teaches courses on anti-racism education, sociology of race and ethnicity, Indigenous knowledge and decolonization, and education in African context. His students affectionately refer to him as Nana, and that's so much for the way that he's poured into many of our lives and scholarly lives, including mine. On our panel this evening, we have Dr. Sharon Fraser-Burgess, who is Professor Emeritus at Ball State University. Dr. Fraser-Burgess, his focus is undergraduate teacher licensing, professional education programs, and also philosophy and ethics courses in the Master of Arts and doctoral program in educational studies. She leads with the intention to come alongside. I thought this was so beautiful when I read this description. Come alongside teacher candidates and practicing teachers in making the theory to practice connection that social justice and education requires. We're also joined by Dr. Joyanne de Forbab, who is the research director at the University of Belize. She was appointed as the research director in March 2024, having served as the interim research director at the research office. Prior to that, she served for 4 years as an assistant professor in the Faculty of Education and Arts at the University of Belize. She was the coordinator of the Field Experience and Research Methods in Education courses. And Dr. de Forbab is a former co-chair of the Caribbean and African Studies in Education Special Interest Group of the American Educational Research Association. And we also have Matthew Adebi. He's an assistant professor of elementary and social studies and education in the Mary Lou Fulton Teachers College. His work focuses on the development and implementation of teacher candidates' capacity for designing inquiry-oriented teaching and teachers' thinking as they learn to teach across cultural contexts. Dr. Odebi's teaching experience spans years in contexts such as Nigeria and the US. And I'm going to be giving my co-panelists an opportunity to talk to you about some more about the publication this evening. So Jamaicans have a saying, Maliko but Mitaloa. How many people under the sound of my voice know that saying? It's often uttered by Louise Bennett Coverley, affectionately referred to as Miss Lou. And it means that one is small but mighty, tiny but powerful. No one embodied this more than Marcus Messiah Garvey. When Bob Marley belted out, emancipate yourself from mental slavery, none but ourselves can free our minds, it was like putting Garvey's words to music. Marley's song, Africa Unite, lyrically encapsulates the Pan-African movement that Garvey heralded. Africa Unite, Marley sang, because we're moving right out of Babylon and we're going to our father's land. How good and how pleasant it would be before God and man to see the unification of all Africans. Martin Luther King Jr. came to describe Garvey as, quote, the first man of color in the history of the United States to lead and develop a mass movement, to give millions of Black people a sense of dignity and destiny and make Black people feel like they're somebody end quote. And Malcolm X, whose parents were involved in the UNIA, credited Garvey with the independence movements among African states. Sherlock and Bennett hold us up in sharing that his influence reached as far as Kenya's Mau Mau region and the resistance against colonial powers. Another area of Garvey's influence was the religion of Rastafarians. Our chapter examines alignment with what scholars such as Ali Nouri and Syed Mahdi Sajadi have termed emancipatory pedagogy, which is an approach concerned with education playing a role in creating a just and democratic society. We also examine current decolonization movements in Caribbean and Africa that have seen states shed their European monarchies to become republics. We applied an anti-colonial pedagogical prism to programs in Africa and the Caribbean where Garveyism has inspired educational policies and practices. We looked at two specific programs, the Jamaican Rastafarian Development Community School in Ethiopia and the Jamaican Ministry of Education Marcus Garvey School pilot project. The following questions guided our inquiry. How has education in Africa and the Caribbean been reimagined within the lens of these current decolonization and anti-colonialism movements? And how does Garveyism-based emancipatory pedagogy align with the move towards full independence in recent decades by a number of countries in the Caribbean and Africa? And what are the larger implications for facilitating such movements in the post-2020 era of digital colonization? How have policy changes in building Black pride, encouraging self-reliance, and improving economic outcomes been implemented in these school sites? Our methodology entailed an analytical approach that brings to bear the key ideas of Garveyan emancipatory pedagogy. The essence of Garvey's message was one of racial pride and self-reliance for Black people. And I think given the times that we're in, his message is even more profound and relevant. And as Garvey once said, quote, "The reliance of our race upon the progress and achievements of others for a consideration in sympathy, justice, and rights is like a dependence upon a broken stick, resting upon which will eventually consign you to the ground," end quote. We call this chapter Trees with Roots because of the sheer rootedness of Garvey's legacy, his own words about knowing our history, and also because, as those of you who garden a little bit might know, everything happens at the roots, and how a plant or a tree is rooted will determine whether it will live. And if it lives, whether it will flourish and thrive. Emancipatory pedagogy is about doing that root work. And now I'll turn it over to Dr. Fraser Burgess to tell us a little bit more about the larger publication.
Thank you so much, Dr. Green, for the lovely introduction. Greetings to everyone, the director and chair, Dr. Campbell, professors, students and invited guests, as well as the affiliates of the center. It's a pleasure to be with you all this evening and to share just a little bit about the text within which Dr. Green and Dr. Day's work is housed. And it is, I'll just, for a few minutes, I'll share the origin of the book and then just a brief outline. So the text itself consists of 3 sections, and the sections are indicative of the process by which this book emerged. So just generally, the sections of the book are the past sort of influences and frames of reference that have shaped thinking about education systems in the Caribbean and Africa. The second section is the sort of present realities, and the third section has to do with future prospects. And we were moved in this direction, inspired to do so as a part of the 2022 Executive Committee of the Caribbean and African Studies in Education, SIG, of the American Educational Research Association. The co-editors, who were, as you will see, myself, Joyanne de Forbab, Verna, Verna, I just had a slight, Verna Knight, Matthew Odebiyi, and Isola Salami and Alicia Alert. So we had a robust body of editors. And we were, for the most part, except for Dr. Isola Salami, part of this executive committee. And we were contemplating, upon being invited by Bloomsbury to theorize such a text, we were contemplating what were the influences that were driving our sense of what this text could achieve. 2019 had been the year of return in Ghana, which really sort of led a contemplation of what does it mean to think about the 400-year sort of commemoration of the start of slavery and its impact on the African diaspora. And we were also thinking about vibrant conversations that were happening in education corners in the Caribbean and in Africa, the stirrings of a sense of the importance of indigenous thought and epistemic freedom. And so we conceived of a text that would do this work for scholars who were interested in the diasporic study of the evolution of education system, and also to generate a connection between the motherland, Africa, if you will, and also the countries that have emerged out of the transatlantic and trade and enslaved persons. And so we thought that such a volume should reflect on how we got here and do that with a philosophical orientation. And so the first section does kind of do that connection and look and also examine what would it be like to have indigenous philosophies being brought to bear on how we think about what education should achieve in terms of liberation and freedom, and also connection with one's families and roots and history. And so that's the first section explores that work, and we have wonderful contributions, of which Dr. Green's is one, conceptualizing this notion of Caribbean emancipatory pedagogy that links Africa and the Caribbean. The second section, as you will hear from Dr. de Forbab, the second section, as you hear from Dr. Odebi, deals with the present kinds of challenges that we are confronting, especially in light of what COVID-19 exposed. And then finally, thinking forward, how do we move forward? What is the recursive process that allows us to bring these new schemas of thinking and Caribbean liberation rooted in kind of an African sense of connection with the world? How can this be a component part of conceptualizing the philosophies of the Caribbean and Africa going forward? So thank you very much for the chance to discuss the totality of the work.
Professor Green, who is going next?
Oh, yes, I think Dr. Odebi going to share with us. Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, good day. I am Oluseyi Matthew Odebi. I go by Matthew. I'm here at Arizona State University. It's awesome to see all of you, and some of you, good seeing you again today, Joanne. Essentially, I'm going to quickly cut to the chase. I believe Sharon has been able to, give a summary of essentially what the book is about. In this section, I think I'm going to kind of lean more towards kind of reflection, being one of the editors of the book, and again, the discussion that is kind of, evolving post-publication of the book. The book came out last month, 17 or 19, right? Or September. We've started a lot of, good conversation. In section 2, let me start from there. As Sharon said, we kind of take a look at, where are we? And again, within the question of where are we contemplated also who are we? And I think one of the motivations that, is also been mentioned as part of reflection is the idea that, as we all know, there is really not much exemplar work that kind of put research from, African Caribbean together. It's kind of like scattered everywhere. No, works have been done, but we just think we need, a compilation of many of these wonderful work that, if you think about Caribbean and African education, you kind of have an idea of go to. Where can I start? Like a starting point. And again, if I already have a foundation, where can I get this corpus of work that kind of help me understand where we are, what is going on, and essentially contributing to the larger scholarship sphere, in the global research realm. So all that to say that one of the reflection was the idea that if our goal is to make sure that the less visible voices are heard, we have to provide a platform where people can have access to such scholarship. Like we've kind of talked about this morning, sometimes we will say we are kind of our architect of our own destiny. We have the expertise, we're smart people, we have the community, we have resources. Then what else? What else do we need? And as somebody we say, I mean, this day I started thinking about, okay, if this one is this way, I ask myself, what am I going to do about it? So what I'm going to do about it is to do something about it. And that is one of the things that we've done with the collection of the work to say, we know that we have less visible voices. We are doing amazing work, scholars from African Caribbean context. As you can see from, just take a look at the table of content first and, take a minute to read, the excellent work like that of, Dr. Green, talking about all this methodology. They cannot push more than the envelope. Actually, I think they push the package. So, so those who are kind of push us to kind of rethink the kind of methodology we use. And again, it also helps us to kind of situate those, context specific, culturally, relevant and specific, methodology, theorizing and empirical work to kind of situate them within the larger corpus of, mainstream research as well. So, and the other reflection is the idea that, speaking with my doctoral student and some other student in my program who, have seen the work or have heard about the work, it's the idea that, everybody seems elated. And at the same time, being able to say, okay, I can draw this connection between, context A, and now I have contents B and C. Or we can say I can draw connection between context, African context. Now I have the same connection to draw from the Caribbean. Now I have the same, possibly, they might have different interpretation, of course, but on the same topic, we have wider varieties of context to kind of draw from. And finally, as one of the, editors of the book actually challenged me to, and all of us, because we've kind of started another conversation to think about the next step, right? And that's the kind of, still come around the idea that what are we going to do about it? And we are doing something, we're set, and we continue doing something. So all that to say that it kind of challenged the way I think as a scholar, the way I think as an educator, the way I think as a teacher, and the way I actually relate with the community as well. Now I'm kind of like, I'm confident that now, at least at this basic level, we have some work that we can draw on. We have where we can direct our students to. We have where we can direct practitioners to. And I believe that through the book, we give voices to those who may otherwise, maybe I believe in their voices being heard somehow, somewhere, but at least I'm happy to be part of that process of, elevating, these voices. And thank you so much, everybody that we work together. And thank you so much, Hardy Archer. We wouldn't have been able to do it without you. And I'm grateful for the opportunity to be here.
Thank you so much, Matthew. I'm going to put on the final speaker in the group. That is Professor Joan DeBarb. And it's over to you to do the final conversation there.
Thank you very much. I know we are against time, but like Matthew, this was a very, very exciting project. And I had the great good fortune and opportunity to do 2 book launches of the project in South Africa, where it was really well received by faculty at the University of Venda and Caribbean University of Technology. And yes, everybody is excited about what next comes out of the work. I could always share this with you, Andrew, but it was a process, and we thought it very important to document the process. And so it didn't happen overnight. It happened over 2 years of real consistent work, sending out that call for papers, reviewing. So through it, as Matthew said, we learned quite a lot. The timeline was a full 2 years and getting to the end. These are the 3 sections, and I, along with Alicia, I was one of the co-editors for this section 3, and we have exciting chapters in 3. There were things that we didn't get to. For example, we didn't get any chapters on teacher education, and so we are like, we need a whole volume on just teacher education. But together, all the chapters really give us great insight into it. We were lucky to have a foreword written by Sharon's colleague, Michael. And so that really set the tone for the entire volume. And I really hope that one of the students sitting in here would take up the responsibility of writing a review for the handbook and get that as a publication. We learned a lot of things through this process. And, Andrew, as I'm sitting here, I'm just thinking of when we first met in Jamaica in 2011, way back when these things were only dreams for us. And it's our partnerships through the Caribbean and African Studies and Education, our partnerships in CASE, there's another group called the Caribbean Research Methodologies, your group, there's CYF. I hosted a conference earlier this year with a large group of people. I just want to tell the students in the room that we Caribbean researchers are doing stuff on what we know, and we are slowly but surely advancing a lot of work around methodology of doing research. And this collaboration between our African cousins and brothers and sisters, long lost to us, was really very powerful. I mean, Africa is a huge continent. The diaspora is also very huge, but there's a lot of appetite for the work that's going on, and I encourage you to link with the work that is going on there. I would say to the students in the room to remember that this is a developmental process. And as long as you have the time as an editor, we worked with our colleagues to really bring some of these papers along. So we have both novice writers and experienced writers, but everybody really stepped up. And so it was very insightful to us. And so again, like Matthew, I'd like to thank the group of 6 of us who came together, braved this. We have a lot of work to do still. And so I'm excited to link up. I am on Andrew's Facebook, so I know all the things that are happening. And so it's exciting to be in the room with the group, and I will certainly continue to meet. Let me say that every Wednesday, and I want to offer the invitation through the network, we have a Wednesday webinar. It's 4 p.m. South African time. And we are always looking for people to present. This morning, Matthew presented on AI in terms of our Caribbean. So that's I can always send you that information. We are constantly looking for presenters and students even presenting what your work is about. So I end with saying that, you know, Pan-Africanism is still well alive in 2024. And whether we are looking at anti-Blackness, anti-Black racism among children, within teacher education, we are continuing to push the envelope, push the stone, push whatever we are pushing. We are continuing to push. And so let's continue because there's a lot of work still to be done. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you so much.
you
You can
so
stop
much.
sharing your screen. Thank you so much. I want to add back Marie. I want to add back Sharon to the pin. I want to add myself to the pin. I want to add Matthew to the pin. And I want to say something to our students. And just so you know, there's not just students in the room, Professor DeBob. There's a lot of community in the room and other professors as well. Last night in this two evening series, last night when we stopped the recording, I regretted stopping the recording last night at the point I stopped it, because right afterwards, I said something and I wish we had recorded. We talked about the ways in which we are showing up for ourselves as Black scholars, and the ways in which Matthew said, the ways in which we have to ensure that our voices are heard. You know, at the beginning, I talk about FUBU, for us, by us. We have to stop thinking that we need institutional credit and resources to do the work. And I know it's harder for us. It takes a lot around the corner, but we are getting it done. I have the pleasure, and Joan DeBob, I have to go there. I have to go there because my students who are in the room, and not just my students, I see community. I see people like Dr. Watson. I see other people in the room, and I see people from TDSB in the room. I see you. I know you. I see you. And I just want to say, I remember when you met me, my first conference, and you asked me, who are you? And I said, I am a student at I feel my emotions, a student at the University of Toronto. And the love and the treatment you showed me and the care, I will never forget that. I will never forget that. And look at it today. When you were talking, I was smiling nonstop. I don't know if Professor Marie Green, who I work with, knows our connection, but that same case executive you talked about, I was on it for a year. I have presented at the in America 4 conferences, and those 4 conferences I presented in CASE, the Caribbean African Studies Studies in Education. And you were a vital part of that. Sharon, I looked up to you. You are way up there. I admire you. I look up to you. I see the work. I have seen Matthew. We have shared the same room, same space when it comes to our research and presentation. And look at this. Who would tell me that my own co-worker, my own professor in this work, Professor Mary Green, would have submitted to a book in that space and published with Professor George Day, Nana Day, in that space? When I say to you students, network, when I say to you students and community who are listening to the video, because I've gotten feedback already today that Dr. Campbell, I watched the entire video today. When I say to you, show up in community, show up to pour in community, and community will show up for you. Somebody like you, Joanne DeBob, could call on me to do many things. Don't call on me too much now, but you could call on me to do many things, because I remember as a young scholar, didn't have a PhD at that time, and you asked me, who are you? What's your name? Where are you from? What you doing here? And you just cheered me on and gave me feedback. Today, I'm speaking to you as a professor at the University of Toronto in anti-racist pedagogy and the director for the Center for Black Studies in Education. And I am honored to be sharing space with you all. Honored. Marie Green, I don't know what you did when you invited these people. These people fill my cup this evening. I know Professor Ann Lopez must be in the background because she knows everybody here, and she's always in the, this is connection. Black African Caribbean in the space, continental African Caribbean diaspora. This is it. This is what it looks like. So I just want to say thank you so much. And guess what? We are going to hear, don't move, because I'm going to say this unapologetically. Our next presenter that is coming to us. Thank you so much again, Professor Mary Green, for leading this. You are amazing. Love you, respect you always. The next presenter coming to us is Professor Jokiwan, and she is an amazing professor here. You're going to hear her bio in a minute. But also she's going to talk about African Indigenous Leadership Approach. And this is how the continent meets North America to the diaspora. And one of the conferences led by Professor Jokiwan, and I hope you have heard about it, but if not, I want to tell you about it, is the Black Feminist Conference here at the University of Toronto. And I can tell you, that's one of the spaces that I went with my cup empty and just held it like this. And I left emotional and I left full. If you know anything about having Black women pour into you, I could tell you that is the space. And so it's my honor to welcome into the space Professor Jokiwan. And before Professor Jokiwan will address us and speak to us and share our research and share all the power that she has poured into me on a one-on-one basis, I can tell you we're going to ask Mohammed Rage, who is the GA for the Center for Black Studies in Education, taking up his position in January 2025. I would ask Mohammed to do the introduction for Professor Jokiwan. Go ahead, Mohammed.
Thank you very much, Dr. Campbell. I didn't know I was getting introduction. All right, so I'm going to get right into it, right? I want to thank everyone in attendance today and to thank Dr. Campbell specifically for inviting me to announce our next speaker, Dr. Jokiwan. Dr. Jokiwan is a professor at the Ontario Institute for Studies in Education, University of Toronto, and an accomplished educator, author, researcher, and educational leader. From 2011 to 2014, Professor Wan served as special advisor on status of women issues, contributing to research and policy development concerning the intersectionality of gender with race, disability, sexual orientation, aboriginality at the University of Toronto. From 2018 to 2021, she also served as the Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion Advisor for the Vice President of Human Resources and Equity. She also served as director at the Center for Integrative Anti-Racism Studies at OISE from 2006 to 2014. An award-winning teacher, Professor Wan was the recipient of many awards, the most recent one being the Legend Award in 2023 by OISE alumni, Black History Champion and Leadership Excellence Award 2023 presented by CETI, HHS, NICS, and SC, all community organizations. Excellence Award in Education awarded by Jun Sitian Community Organization in 2022, Excellence Award in Community Engagement in Toronto 2020, the Gown African Scholars Award, African Alumni Association, University of Toronto 2018, the President of Toronto Teaching Award 2017. She's also well-published, 21 books co-edited and single-authored, with her most recent edited book being Education, Colonial Sickness, Anti-Colonial African Indigenous Project. Her forthcoming books are Black Canadian Principles of Feminist Theorizing, Historical Spirals of Spiritual Healing, sole author of Womanism, Decolonizing Feminisms, and the Dialects of Black Women's Experiences, co-edited, Toil for Laughter, Black Women in Work, co-edited, In My Sister's House, Black Feminisms in Canada and Beyond, co-edited, and Sometimes There Are Tears, Black Woman in Wellness, co-edited, At the Helm, Black Woman in Leadership, co-edited, Black Women in Leadership Positions in Canada Universities and Colleges, sole authored, Where Are the Black Boys, sole authored. Professor Wan has supervised to completion over 100 students in both master and doctoral programs. So without further delay, I'd like to offer a warm welcome to Dr. Jokiwan.
Thank you so much, Professor Wan. Respect and love. Over to you.
Thank you. Good evening, and wow, such introduction sort of is very emotional because you don't even think about what you're doing on a daily basis. And I always say that it's my students. My students keep me alive. My students pour to me because when you meet with them, you learn from them. And I would like to give appreciation to the work that the students has offered me. And many of them end up being professors at the University of Toronto or other spaces. So tonight, what I'm going to share with you is the work I have been doing in terms of Black Canadian women in leadership positions in Canadian institutions. But before I start on that, I want to say good evening to all of you. And it's a real pleasure to be participating in this conversation. Dr. MBC, thank you for organizing the speaker series where we are going to be learning and learning and where we are going to be filling the cup that we've been talking about. And this evening, tonight, I'll be sharing with you some of my findings from the research that I've talked about. And I'll be situating these findings on African indigenous leadership approach by African/Black women across the globe. And what I'm talking about is here is the ancestral knowledge that the women that are interviewed did not know they were sharing with me. I'll just give you a little background to the research. Number one, there are extremely very few women of Black ancestry in leadership positions in Canada. When I started to research or to look into the issues of Black women in leadership, I could not even find a single article that had been written on African/Black women leadership in Canadian institutions. I found one particular article that had been written about African and South Asian women in leadership. I'm glad to report that since I launched this work, I've supervised 5 students who have actually written on women in leadership, different modes of leadership, whether it's in banking, whether it's in community organizations, whether it's in politics, whether it's in non-profit organizations, and the work is growing. The participants, without them knowing what they were telling me, what they were talking about, situated themselves in what I called the African epistemology. They situated their conversations that I had on African philosophy, the Sankofa, looking back to see what they had inherited from their parents, from their grandparents, looking back to see what they had inherited as they grew up, to situate their indigenous leadership approach in the academy. What also I found was these Black women situated their leadership in African structures of leadership, in particular, the 7 principles of Kwanzaa. And the first one was umoja, unity. The second one was Unjichagulia, self-determination. The third was Ujima, collective work and responsibility. The other one is Ujamaa, that is cooperative economics. Nia, that is purpose. Kuumba, creativity. And Iman, that is faith. The interesting thing about these women, by the way, before I go on, I want to acknowledge Karenga for creating these 7 principles that I situated this work in. I just wanted to say that I had so many findings and it will be impossible for me to share everything. I'll just be very selective to share what I think or I feel will be of use to us as a community. I situated this work in what I call anti-colonial thought. And the reason why I situated it in anti-colonial thought is not a new creation. People of African ancestry have always been doing anti-colonial work from the point of encounter, they started resisting. They started looking for ways to ensure that their freedom was never taken. A lot of what they own might appear to have been taken away, but this research has indicated to me that no, the knowledge, the African ways of knowing is still in their body. It is still stored in their blood memory. And that was very, very refreshing for me to listen to them and to know that it might feel that we have lost it, but I'll tell you, we have not. The second theoretical framework that I used was anti-Black racism. And the reason why I situated that work on anti-Black racism is because in 2019, when I started this research, why should there be so few Black women in leadership positions in the academy? Not even to call about the Black men. Canada has been in existence for more than 200 years. Where have Black women been thrown to that there is none? Very few within the leadership positions in the academy. Forward to 2024, I must say that I'm just talking now about the University of Toronto. I think we have done very, very, very well. We do have quite a number of Black women in leadership positions, and today we have a Black dean, Dean Walker, Erica Walker, a Black dean. So that in itself shows that there has been some movement somewhere. And that's why it's important to speak, to bring it out, and to indicate there are gaps, and these gaps need to be filled. I'll share with you, I'll just list them down, the various findings that I found. Spirituality was central to all the women that I spoke to. And when they talked about spirituality, they were not just talking about Christianity or Islam or any other religion. They were talking about their connection to the Creator. They said, I needed to have something I can look up to. I needed to have something that when everything is going astray, when I feel so, fragmented, I can look up and I can hear a voice telling me, you can speak or don't speak. I can hear a voice telling me, don't worry, this too will pass. And it's very interesting because I am also in the process of looking at the African queens. That is one of my books that is coming out. And those ancient African queens had exactly the same thing. Spirituality was very central in everything they did. Most of the African queens that I've researched on did have temples, did have special places of worship. And we can see that throughout when you do research, Queen of Sheba, when you look at Mother, Queen Mother Ya, when you look at Nahanda, and so on and so forth, I can name them. I can go on and on naming them. So spirituality was very central, and it enabled them to survive. I'll clearly say the violence in the academy. Because the violence in the academy, they always reminded me, we are here not in our institution, not in an institutions that were created for us. It's very, very comfortable for people of European ancestry. So we have to find mechanisms of surviving the violence, and spirituality was one of them. One of the other the second knowledge claim, because I like to call them knowledge claims instead of the findings, was the aspect of ancestral knowledge. And what I mean by ancestral knowledge, interestingly, despite the fact that they felt that sometimes when they approached the community did not trust them because they were seen as traitors. I remember one particular participant saying, you know, some members of my community are not happy for me that I've been given this huge responsibility. They indicate that I should have turned it down. And she said no, because the only way to change the status quo, the only way to bring change is to be at that table. Because when it's necessary for you to speak, you will speak and you'll be led. In terms of the ancestral knowledge, is the collective responsibility that I alluded to in 7 Principles of Kwanzaa. Collective responsibility. There was this notion, although they knew that they did not have a lot of power in themselves, there was a feeling of collective responsibility. How can I mentor young Black women, young Black men to be in the positions that I'm in? And I'll remember this, the quote is still in my head. This particular participant said, you know, I don't just employ Black people now that I'm in a leadership position. What I do, I create programs that will identify the need for Black people to participate in. When I finally leave this position, because it's an appointment for 5 years, the programs will be there. And I hope there'll be other people to continue with the program. Again, using very subversive way of ensuring that her mark is felt. And when she looked back to some of the organizations that she had led, she could point out and say, you know, in that institution, in that college, in that place, we have a lot of racialized people because of the programs that I had created when I was there. Another ancestral knowledge claim was consultative. There was a lot of consultation. And many times they consulted because it was important to weigh the decision that they were going to make. And even if they did not, end up following the advice and the words of all the people that they consulted with, but they felt that at least they had different opinions of the decisions that they had to make. As I said, another ancestral knowledge, the purpose, the purpose. All of them without exception, they ask themselves, what is my purpose for the next 5 years? What is my purpose for the next 10 years? And they would have a vision that will be created collectively. Very, very interesting. And the vision always included community as well as bringing together other women from other institutions. And currently, there is one particular woman who has actually tried to mobilize women leaders across Canada. The other thing that they talked about is, despite the fact that they were in colonial institutions, they indicated the importance of creating spaces of liberation. And in particular, they said, liberation cannot be given to you. Reparation is in you. if you think you're oppressed, if you think you're victim, I'm using words of some of the participants. If you think you're oppressed, if you think you're a victim, you'll always be a victim. So it was very, very, very important. Although it's like an illusion because of the place where we are working, but they had that hope. There was that hope. The hope, and some of them, the hope that they constantly repeated. Despite enslavement for 400 years, enslavement ended. Of course, there is mental slavery. Of course, there is spiritual slavery. Of course, we are still in the plantation. But at least that dehumanization of a particular group of people came to an end. Even if it's there, it's not as overt as it was during those years. And they indicated, despite the notion that I don't have freedom in this institution, spiritually, they said they were liberated. There were, some aspects that they emphasized to me. And they said, unfortunately, due to colonization, due to that path of enslavement, the trust among and between people of African ancestry, and in particular even among women, had been shattered. And they always were yearning for that. How can we recreate the mutual circles of trust that our great-great-great-grandparents had, so that we can work together to deal with colonial sickness? And they also indicated, I think I mentioned at the next point, they felt many times there was no support at all from other Black women, no support at all. In fact, some of the Black women in their institution became their competitors. And that, again, they said they did not fault them. They pointed fingers at the structures, the institutional structures, the colonial structures. And the recommendation, especially from one of them, was, let's find ways of healing, because it's lack of healing that has created that lack of support, that fragmentation, that notion that I can't trust her, I can't work with her, and so on and so forth. The final thing that I'm going to share with you, and this was very, very emotional, was one particular woman who said, I have been scarred. I have a disease that has no name. And she said, I don't believe this disease came from outside. It came from the experiences of being in the position she was in. And she said she believed she was not the only one who was scarred by that experience. Again, all that she said is, Joki, please find ways of bringing us together to start healing. Although the conference that I organized last year and the previous year was on Black/African feminisms, there was a lot of healing that took place. There was so much healing that took place. And it was done purposely to address the importance of self-care, the importance of slowing down, the importance of saying no when, you as the only Black woman in that institution, you're told you have to be on this committee, you have to be on hiring committee, you have to be on that committee. Standing up and saying, something, I only have 24 hours in a day. I can't be on every committee I can't be, on all the posters to show that there is diversity in your institution. Last but not least is to remember, as women of African ancestry, that research gave me lots of comfort. That research opened my eyes to the social organization of many institutions in the academy in Canada. We are, and I want to leave you with, especially for the young professors who are coming up, do not, and this was a statement that I had from a lot of people, do not say, no, 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 I can't be in leadership positions. No, 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 I can't do that. Please make sure you start the mentorship journey, the path to be in a leadership position, not to wait until down the road. Make sure you enroll in those leadership courses, and especially in many, many institutions over that. Do online courses on leadership because our voices are needed. Last but not least is the work we do is sacred work. We are here for a reason. And the sacredness of that work is the spirit within us. The spirit to lead. The spirit to be there for other people. And the spirit to hold each other's hands and we move together as as a collective. Because when one succeeds, all of us succeeds. When one fails, all of us fail. Thank you, Dr. MBC. Thank you to Dr. Green. Thank you to Dr. Evu. Thank you, Dr. Linda. I did not butcher your name for sharing the platform with me. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much. Just want to add back the speakers tonight to add back to the pin. And thank you so much, Professor Jokiwan. I've said the thank yous. It was good. I am excited to see what is next. I must tell community that I have had professors from inside and outside of OISE who have said to me, I would love to be part of the session the next time. That for me, as you said, Professor Dr. Mary Green, it brought me emotions and it brought me joy because I know that, as you said, Dr. Professor Joki, we are busy. People are busy. Every time I call on someone, I am mindful of how busy people are. And then I get the yes. And it's not a piece of yes. Just look how you all showed up tonight in your fullness. Every one of you were here before we started. You showed up in your fullness for our things. And I'm grateful. I am grateful. I'm the director for the center, started and led with persons like yourself, Professor Joki, when I took the baton from you and Professor Ann Lopez, and I'm running with it. And I like what you just said to all of us as Black young people, especially the younger set. Do not shy away from leadership. It's a self-care to know how to deal with it, but do not shy away. Because like you said it, Professor Joanne DeBarb, I remember you said it, if we all keep shying away and then we are going to keep on perpetuating, we are going to be cultivating the very things that we speak against. So when I say to my young people, when there's a seat at the table, show up, take the seat. Yes, in your heart, you know, sometimes they are just tokenizing that seat. That's the one black seat. And I've said it before. I have been invited to the table and I've gone to tables when I look around and I go, oh, they want a black token. The moment I sat down 5 minutes into my first meeting, they realized, oh, damn it, he ain't the token that we want. Because my mouth opens. And I start speaking, and I start representing, and I start showing up, and I start talking. And that is what you said. You reminded us this evening, Professor Juan, how to lead. When I listened to your bio, I've read it before. I've read it before because that's what I do. I want to know the people that I admire so much. And I see the many, many, many opportunities for leadership. One thing I must say, what I didn't see before in your bio, and I'm so happy that you put it in intentionally, the closing of the bio, and I'm going to close with this. The closing of the bio reached me powerful. The last line in your bio says, Professor Jokiwan, where Professor One has supervised to completion over 100 students in both master's and doctoral programs. That's all I'm going to say. That's all I'm going to say. Myself, Professor Dr. Marie Green, Professor Linda, we are coming behind. We are new. But we admire the work, the way you have watered community, the way you walk in community. When I was a student at OIC, you were a professor at OIC. People would say to me, have you been in Professor One's course? I said, no, I'm in leadership. She's in social justice. You should take one of her courses. I didn't get to take any of your courses, but I have sat in your world classroom like tonight and drink. When you talk about colonial sickness, the first time you said that, it hit me so hard. I never forget how I felt when you explained colonial sickness. Power. Professor Mary Green, thank you for the way you're walking in community. Thank you for bringing in those things that sometimes we seem to forget. The religion part, the emancipatory, even the language around your topic. We need to make sure we're saying them. Tonight you cited some powerful Black men when you started. Thank you. Professor Linda, I am waiting just to hear more. I know you started 7,000. I know. And then it's 1,000. And that's why I admire you. That's why when I'm in your presence, I admire you, because I know the power you carry, the power you bring, the power that comes with you. You know, you smile, we laugh, we talk, but I know the power that you bring, and community needs it. Community, for those who don't know, this is Professor Linda Ifenu, an amazing Black psychologist and Black educator in that space that is rarely the handful. The handful. We have one of the handful, and I want to be part of those persons that help to take care of that one handful that we have. Enough love, everybody. Enough love, community. Enough love, students. GA 5708. LHAE, Leadership and Diversity students. I see you. I see you. Just so you know, Professor One, there's a whole bunch of LHAE students in the room from leadership. I'm teaching leadership and diversity course with them. So when you were talking, I was like, yeah. Those students are listening, and they're the one of the first group getting the recording tomorrow morning when I get up and ready to live my best life on a Thursday. With that being said, I appreciate you all. Have a wonderful night, community. Enough love, enough love, enough love. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.